The cup is already half empty. The smell, sour grapes, honey, and something metallic, fills the air. A Roman farmer lifts the jug again. His wife watches, her hands raw from grinding grain. Even their child drinks from the same watered-down mix. No one questions it. Because in Rome, wine wasn't a luxury. It was survival. From the humblest tavern in the Subura to the marble dining halls of the Palatine Hill, every Roman, slave or senator, lived with wine on their lips. It poured through their days like blood through their veins. Morning, noon, night. Work, worship, war. But here's the strange part. This was the civilization that built aqueducts stretching hundreds of miles, a people who mastered water itself. So why did they choose to drink wine instead? To us, it sounds like madness. To them, it made perfect sense. Because Roman water wasn't what you think. It was often filthy, stagnant, crawling with disease. Aqueducts brought clean water, yes, but most of it flowed to public baths and fountains, not into the homes of ordinary people. For the poor, drinking plain water was a gamble. Wine, even cheap sour wine, seemed safer. When you mixed it with water, it killed bacteria. It dulled hunger, softened pain, and kept you numb through 12-hour days of labor under the sun. And slowly, it became something more. A ritual, a habit, a quiet addiction that bound an empire together. Rome didn't just enjoy wine. Rome depended on it. From soldiers marching through Gaul to slaves chained in the fields, every sip told the same story of power, fear, and survival. This is the forgotten truth behind the world's greatest empire. They drank to live. They drank to forget, and in the end, it might have been the drink that helped destroy them. Wine was the heartbeat of Rome. From the Senate halls to the back alley taverns, life flowed to the rhythm of the pouring jug. In the morning, it started mild, watered down, barely stronger than juice. By evening, the taverns buzzed with laughter, arguments, and slurred poetry. A Roman day began and ended with wine. It wasn't just a drink, and it was identity. To the Romans, wine separated the civilized from the barbarian. Greeks, Gauls, Egyptians, they all drank differently. But Rome believed only it had perfected the ritual. Wine was order. Wine was culture. Wine was Roman, but not all cups were equal. For the poor, the wine was cheap, sour, spoiled, often mixed with seawater or herbs to mask the taste. It burned the throat and left the stomach aching, yet it was still better than dirty water. In the crowded tenements of the city, men drank standing shoulder to shoulder, jugs passing from one cracked hand to another. For the rich, the story was different. Their villas stored amphorae from Greece, Gaul, and Hispania. They poured Falernian, the most expensive wine in the empire, into silver cups, sweetened it with honey, and debated philosophy while slaves refilled their glasses. Even religion ran on wine. At temples, priests poured it over altars in offering. At funerals, it was spilled for the dead. At festivals, it flooded the streets. The Bacchanalia, wild nights of ecstasy and dance, where wine blurred the line between man and God. Every Roman, from emperor to slave, shared this ritual. The difference was only in quality and consequence. For the elite, wine was a sign of control, a symbol of refinement. For the poor, it was escape, a moment's forgetfulness in a life that offered little else. Yet beneath it all was the same truth. Rome's greatness flowed from its vineyards as much as from its legions. When a Roman lifted his cup, he wasn't just drinking. He was partaking in something sacred, a daily reminder that to be Roman was to belong to a culture of conquest, pleasure, and endless thirst. Rome was the master of water. Its aqueducts arched across valleys, its fountains glittered like marble jewels, and its public baths steamed with luxury. To the modern eye, Rome looks like a civilization that conquered thirst itself. But that image hides a darker truth. The aqueducts carried clean water, yes, but not for everyone. Much of it flowed straight into the homes of the wealthy or the grand public baths where the elite relaxed and talked politics. For the poor in the crowded tenements, clean water was a dream. Their reality came from wells, cisterns, and buckets filled from street fountains that ran murky by midday. The water wasn't always fresh. Animals drank from the same streams. Human waste leaked from the gutters. In the heat of summer, Stagnant pools festered, breeding sickness and death. To drink plain water in ancient Rome was to take a risk, and the Romans knew it. They had no concept of bacteria, but they understood something was wrong, that water could make you sick. Travelers wrote of bad water in certain places. Soldiers carried wine to mix with river water on campaign, and mothers told their children to never drink straight from the cistern. So the Romans found their solution: dilute the danger. They mixed wine with water, usually 3 or 4 parts water to 1 part wine. The alcohol acted as a disinfectant, killing bacteria they couldn't see. The sour taste masked the smell of rot. Suddenly the water seemed safe, and so the habit spread. What began as a precaution became tradition. What began as survival became ritual. Even the soldiers marching along the dusty roads of Gaul carried wine, not just for pleasure, but as protection. Legionaries mixed it into their water rations, calling it posca, a sour blend that kept them alive when rivers ran foul. To live in Rome was to depend on this fragile balance. The empire's glory stood on stone, steel, and fermentation. But there was another side to it, one that no one questioned. The more wine they drank, the more they needed it. And soon no Roman, rich or poor, could imagine life without it. Wine wasn't a luxury anymore. It was the only thing standing between them and sickness. Rome had conquered the world. But even its greatest minds couldn't conquer its thirst. To the Romans, drinking wine wasn't just safe, it was smart. They believed it was science, logic, civilization distilled into a cup. The rule was simple: never drink wine pure. A Roman who drank undiluted wine was a savage, a drunkard, someone without discipline. They saw it as losing control, something fit only for barbarians and fools. So they mixed 3 parts water to 1 part wine, sometimes even more. The result was weak, sour, but civilized. It let you drink all day without collapsing, at least. That's what they told themselves. Philosophers like Pliny and Galen wrote about the health benefits of this balance. They believed wine cleansed the body, warmed the blood, and strengthened the heart. Doctors prescribed it to the sick, the wounded, and even to children in small amounts. It was medicine. Or so they thought. Roman doctors didn't understand bacteria, but they had keen eyes. They saw that people who drank mixed wine often lived longer than those who drank plain water. To them, that was proof enough. Wine purified, protected, preserved. And so an empire of reason found reason to drink. At banquets, scholars debated not whether to drink, but how much water should go in the mix. Some added herbs or honey for taste. Others boiled the wine into syrup, sapa, to make it sweeter, unknowingly infusing it with deadly lead. Even their medicine carried poison, yet to the Romans, it all made sense. They had turned drinking into a ritual of logic, not indulgence. Every sip could be explained. Every refill was justified. In a way, it mirrored their empire itself, disciplined, structured, controlled on the surface, but slowly corroding underneath. Wine was no longer just a drink. It was philosophy, a belief that reason could turn danger into safety, that control could mask addiction, that knowledge could protect them from the things they didn't understand. But reason can only go so far. And while the Romans convinced themselves they were drinking for health, what they were really doing was feeding a dependence disguised as wisdom. They didn't just dilute wine with water. They diluted truth with comfort. And in Rome, even the act of drinking was a measure of who you were. Wine didn't just divide the living from the dead. It divided the worthy from the worthless. For the poor, it was survival. For the rich, it was performance. In the cramped taverns of the Subura, the air was thick with smoke and sweat. Laborers and slaves crowded around wooden tables, drinking sour wine from chipped clay cups. It was cheap, bitter, and barely drinkable. But it dulled the pain of another day spent hauling stone or cleaning latrines. They didn't sip for pleasure. They drank to forget. Meanwhile, up on the Palatine Hill, another kind of drinking took place. Here, marble floors gleamed, and gold plates shimmered under lamplight. Guests reclined on couches while slaves poured Falernian, a vintage so prized that poets compared it to nectar of the gods. To drink too much was vulgar. To drink too little was ungrateful. There was an art to appearing in control. The elite saw moderation as virtue, a mark of civilization. They quoted philosophers like Seneca and Cato, who preached that excess led to ruin. Yet behind their words lay indulgence. The same senators who condemned drunkenness at banquets would drink themselves senseless in private gardens. Hypocrisy fermented as easily as their wine. Among Rome's moralists, wine became a metaphor for discipline, proof that the empire's strength lay in restraint. To master your drink was to master yourself, and to master yourself was to prove you were Roman, not barbarian. But in the back alleys, moderation was a luxury few could afford. The poor drank whatever they could find: spoiled wine, vinegar, even the leftover dregs drained from amphorae. Anything that dulled the hunger, the cold, the fear. And in those moments, the empire's mask slipped. The same liquid that symbolized refinement at imperial banquets was the same one staining the streets below, poured into cracked cups, passed from hand to hand by men whose names history would never remember. Wine revealed Rome's greatest contradiction, a civilization that worshipped control, yet lived in quiet addiction. For the elite, it was proof of superiority. For the poor, a fragile mercy. For Rome itself, it was both. The Romans believed wine kept them alive, but in the end, it may have been what slowly killed them. They couldn't see it, the quiet sickness creeping through their blood. To them, a good wine was sweet, thick, and smooth. To achieve that perfect taste, winemakers boiled grape juice into a syrup called sapa. It made cheap wine taste expensive, preserved it for months, and gave it a honeyed flavor loved by emperors and peasants alike. But there was a secret ingredient in that sweetness. Lead winemakers boiled their syrup in lead pots, unaware that the metal dissolved into the liquid. The result was lead acetate, a chemical the Romans would come to know as sugar of lead. Sweet, intoxicating, and deadly. Over years it built up silently inside the body, clouding the mind, blackening the gums, weakening the bones. Some historians believe the symptoms of lead poisoning can be traced all the way to Rome's elite: memory loss, infertility, erratic moods, madness. And yet, no one stopped drinking because wine wasn't just a habit anymore. It was Rome's heartbeat. It was medicine, ritual, comfort. Without it, the empire's daily rhythm would collapse. Even the emperors were trapped in its spell. Tiberius rationed wine during grain shortages, fearing riots. Nero threw orgies where fountains poured with red Falernian. And Caligula, half mad, half divine in his own mind, drank as if each cup might hold immortality. Across the empire, taverns glowed through the night. Slaves bought watered-down leftovers. Soldiers drowned boredom between campaigns. Housewives drank quietly in the corners of crowded homes. Rome was drunk, not always in the wild, staggering way we imagine, but in a slower, deeper sense. Addicted not just to alcohol, but to the comfort it gave. And comfort is a dangerous thing, because comfort numbs the cracks. It hides the pain until it's too late to fix. While Rome's armies fought and its builders raised new temples, another kind of rot spread unseen, a moral, physical decay, born in the same cup that had once symbolized order and civilization. Every class was touched by it. The poor lost themselves in the fog of cheap wine. The rich lost themselves in the illusion of control. The empire that once claimed to rule the world could not rule its own appetite. And so, what began as survival became indulgence. What began as reason became dependence. In every amphora poured, in every toast shouted under the torchlight, there lingered a quiet poison, not just of lead and wine, but of denial. Rome believed it was drinking to live, but it was really drinking to forget. Now, the night falls over Rome. The city glows with oil lamps, the air thick with laughter, smoke, and song. Somewhere in the distance, a lyre plays. The sound drifts through the streets, through taverns, courtyards, and tenements, carried by the same wind that once bore the cries of victory from distant battlefields. In a poor man's home, a clay jug passes from hand to hand. In a senator's villa, silver cups glint under the light of torches. Different worlds, same ritual. Wine had become the great equalizer, the one thread that tied all Romans together. It filled their celebrations and their sorrows, their temples and their graves. They drank at weddings, at funerals, before battles, after victories, and in every sip there was more than thirst. There was memory and forgetting. For the farmer crushed under taxes, wine was escape. For the soldier stationed far from home, it was courage in a cup. For the senator haunted by guilt and ambition, it was silence, a way to drown the noise of conscience. Rome drank because it needed to feel alive. But it also drank to forget what life had become. As the centuries passed, the ritual deepened. The more the empire expanded, the more it drank, not from celebration, but exhaustion. The wine that once symbolized reason and civilization became a mirror of everything Rome tried to hide: addiction, inequality, decay. And yet the ritual never stopped. Because forgetting felt easier than changing, even the poets felt it. Horace wrote, "Wine brings forth truth, yet truth was the one thing Rome feared most." Behind every toast to the gods, every festival of Bacchus, every glimmering amphora poured into the earth, there was the same quiet wish: to be free, even just for a moment. From the weight of empire, but nothing lasts forever. Not marble, not power, not even ritual. By the time the empire began to crumble, the vineyards of Italy still thrived. The soldiers still drank Pascha. The peasants still mixed sour wine with water and called it life. But the taste had changed. It was no longer the taste of survival. It was the taste of nostalgia. Rome had forgotten the reason it drank in the first place. And in that forgetting lay its tragedy, because in the end, the same drink that built the empire's spirit also blurred its vision. The same sweetness that once masked the bitterness of water now masked the bitterness of decline. The amphorae still stood, the fountains still flowed, the laughter still echoed through the streets, but it was hollow, faint, fading. The world's greatest empire was drunk on its own legend, and as its light dimmed, the ritual continued, a hand pouring, a cup raised, a sigh lost to time. They drank, one historian wrote, as if each cup could keep the darkness away. But it couldn't. The lamps burned low. The wine turned sour, and Rome, eternal, invincible Rome, slipped quietly into the very forgetfulness it had spent centuries trying to escape. Rome, the empire that conquered nations, built monuments and dreamed of eternity, was undone not by one great collapse, but by 1,000 small indulgences. A sip here, a toast there, a comfort that became dependent. The same hands that built aqueducts to tame water raised cups to escape the truth. And in doing so, they wrote a story that feels hauntingly familiar, because every empire drinks something to forget: power, pride, fear, or loss. Rome just made it literal. So the next time you pour a glass, think of them: the farmers, the soldiers, the emperors, each chasing a taste of relief in a world too heavy to bear. The lamps burn low. The echoes fade. And in the silence, one truth remains: even the greatest empires can drown. Not in water, but in their own desire to forget.